Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the second series of Armchair Society. We've got a fantastic lineup ahead of us. My name is Ron James, and it's great to see so many familiar people and new faces today. Today is a sellout, and we've had to turn away 100 people. So you're very lucky to be here. So if you haven't already, make sure you book online for the rest of the series so you don't miss out on quality speakers. A quick reminder, Ron Finkel joins us in a fortnight on Tuesday the 13th of May, a meeting you really don't want to miss. But for now, I'll hand over to the President of Brith, Dr. Peter Shatner, who will introduce our highly respected and admired speaker, Neil Mitchell.
Okay, so Neil Mitchell AO, a prominent Australian journalist and broadcaster who started his radio career with neat hair but ended up with long hair, which I can vouch for is a bit back to front, although you've got neat again. So he's best known, as you know, for his influential tenure at Melbourne's 3AW radio station. However, he began his journalism career at age 17. He spent 16 years at The Age, serving as a reporter, columnist and sports editor. In 1985, he became one of Australia's youngest editors of a metropolitan newspaper when he took the helm at the Herald. Neil joined 3AW in March 1987, and by October 1987 he was hosting the Drive Time program. And in 1990 he transitioned to the morning slot, where he remained a dominant voice for over 3 decades. Never one to be shy making bold statements, Neil's show was renowned for addressing bureaucratic issues and advocating for listeners. For example, his campaign led to the reversal of faulty speed camera fines in Melbourne, resulting in $26 million refunded to motorists. Throughout his career, he has received numerous accolades, beside the clapping at Brith. Officer of the Order of Australia, AO, in 2007 for his service to media and the community through a range of charitable institutions. Neil has supported lots of charities. Graham Perkin Australian Journalist of the Year Award in 2011, marking the first time a radio journalist received this honour. Walkley Award in 2013 for his report on Ford's decision to cease manufacturing in Australia. Multiple Australian Commercial Radio Awards, including induction into the Hall of Fame in 2007, plus many other awards. In September 2023, Neil announced his decision to step down from hosting 3AW mornings after 34 years, with his final broadcast airing on December the 1st, 2023. He continues to publicly voice his opinions by hosting his podcast, Neil Mitchell Asks Why. But before I ask Neil Mitchell to speak to you, let me just make a few announcements, but don't panic, I won't take too long. I don't know how Ron James, the Armchair Society convener, manages to find such interesting speakers from different sides of the political spectrum. Here is a lineup for the next few in the series, starting with Ron Finkel AM, who has some controversial views, but I'm sure this audience can handle it. All the speakers are interesting and informative, and we should be grateful to Ron and his team and to the support of the Brith office and the Land Library in helping to make the society series possible. I also want to thank JAIR, the Jewish Community Radio Station. In case your friends missed this event because it was booked out, did you know Armchair can be heard on 88 FM on your dial and on the internet at jair.com.au on the Thursday at 1 p.m. following this Tuesday. And it can be heard again later from the linked podcasts. Thanks, JA, for supporting the B'nai Brith Land Library Armchair Society, and a special thank you to Robert Bonchek, the founder and driving force of JA. Robert, where are you? He's out the back there, so just thank you to Robert. While I'm doing the thanks, let me thank the Land Library, in particular Merav Carmeli and Roland Lamb, for allowing me to present a new series on groundbreakers of Jewish thought, which starts next week on Thursday at late morning. The series is about learning more about who you are. I believe that especially these days we should know as much as we can about our religion, history and culture. I therefore offer you an opportunity to learn about Shneur Zalman of Liadi, the founder of the Chabad movement, and Joseph Soloveitchik, the towering figure of 20th century modern Orthodoxy. Leo Beck was the Jewish communal leader in Germany during the Nazi era and was known as the Rabbi of Theresienstadt. Hannah Arendt was a political philosopher who was embroiled in controversy in part because of her book on the Eichmann trial in Jerusalem. We all know the late Jonathan Sacks, but do we understand his religious ideas? And Michael Goodman, a public intellectual in Israel today, is he familiar to you? Wish to learn more about these and many others, 15 in all, then you might enrol by going to the Land Library website and finding the section on the Groundbreakers series. The link is also on the flyer, which has been placed on chairs around the auditorium. But now I'm done. And it only remains... okay, applause for that. Well, yeah. It only remains for me to say thank you to Neil Mitchell for giving up your time to speak to us today. I welcome you to the podium. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Thank you.
Off all your phones. I know you think yours is off, but please check it.
Thanks for your advice on my haircut too. Actually, I did look a bit like Colonel Sanders. That was taken towards the end of COVID, and or the lockdowns, and I'd been isolated for some time out of town and nowhere near a barber. In fact, my staff at the end of the lockdown gave me a little scrunchie and a pair of scissors as well. Look, thanks so much for having me, and thanks, Peter, for your words, Ron. Thank you. It's a bit intimidating, actually, to stand here. I've got a lot of friends in the Jewish community. I don't know why, it's just happened. Maybe it's where I grew up. And regularly I'll contact a friend. Let's get rid of that. I love this technology. Regularly I'll contact a friend and say, oh, did you know Jacinta's finished? Or did you know that such and such has done his ACL? Or that Elbow's preference the Greens? And 90% of the time, my Jewish mates will say, yeah, I knew that. Yeah, I knew that. There's a grapevine within this community which is quite extraordinary. If information is power, and it is, this is probably one of the most powerful rooms in Melbourne meeting today. I'd love to be telling jokes and funny war stories all day, but I won't, because I think there's a bit too much serious to discuss today. There's a few war stories, and I hope there's a few things that'll entertain you. I don't want to be grim for an hour, but there's a couple of things that are worrying me in the world at the moment, and the indulgent world of journalism is one of them. But I'm worried about Australia tearing itself apart. I'm worried that hate and dishonesty and aggression is becoming the Australian way. I'm worried that extremism is becoming the norm, and I'm talking about extremism of the left and right. And I'm worried that the people who should be identifying it and helping with it are not. They're sort of snapping around the edges like an angry little chihuahua, making a bit of noise but not too committed to going in and attacking. Those leaders, of course, are the politicians, most of them, the media, much of it, other opinion makers who are just too interested in self-promotion, not genuine achievement or community responsibility. So look, it's a bit weighty, but we're in such times. I wanted to start off though talking about aliens. If creature. People in this room believe in aliens? Do they exist? No. No, I don't know. You're probably right. Who knows? But if, let's say, aliens arrived and they went straight to Washington, because Washington used to run the world. They go straight to Washington. They have a 2-hour meeting with Donald Trump, and they leave, go back to wherever they came from without a photo opportunity or leaving any evidence that they've been here. Who would you believe, being the sceptics that you are, who would you believe if somebody got up on their hind legs and said, look, the aliens have been in Washington for 2 hours. The aliens have been here. Heaven knows why they'd come here. I mean, if the very fact they got here, they've got to be smarter than us to have space travel, but who'd want to be on the planet at the moment in some ways? Not that we've got much option, I guess. But who would you trust to tell you? Donald Trump? Who? ABC. Oh. And the Greens that they're interviewing about it, yeah. But would you trust Donald Trump? You can just imagine the press conference he'd be giving about how he had organised the aliens and they're going to make him president of the world and Venus was going to turn into a beach resort, even though there's no water. Probably nobody would remember Donald Trump normally deports aliens. He doesn't talk to them. Would you trust the media? You're right, they'd be finding somebody to blame. The Age would want to see what the Greens thought about it, so would the ABC. They'd be wanting to know whether the aliens were supporting the war in the Middle East. The Herald Sun would be explaining to them the problems with Luke Darcy's knee. But imagine what the Australian political leaders would do. You'd have Albo talking on and on and on and saying nothing, just in case he said something. And Peter Dutton would want to know if Albo had their mobile number. Trust has gone, respect has gone, decency is on the way out. We can't. You think about it, you couldn't trust anybody to who you would actually. Oh yeah, the aliens have been here. You couldn't trust them. You know better than me what all this means what this hate means to anti-Semitism in particular. The extreme right embraces anti-Semitism. That's their mantra. That's what they do. But the extreme left does as well, but pretends it doesn't. I mean, they often dress it up in the disguise of arguing for peace or fairness or justice. How can people, and this has really puzzled me, I've addressed it a few times, how can people who also campaign to support gay rights or trans rights or such things then passionately support the political philosophies of countries that would throw those guys off the roof? I don't understand it. Or the feminists. And some of the... I do have a bit of a history of fighting with feminists, even though I consider myself to be my definition of a feminist. But the feminists who will argue in support again of these countries that believe women shouldn't be allowed out of the kitchen or the bedroom. And these are the feminists and some of the others who'll stand there and tore strips off people like me because they say we're insulting to the principles of equality and fairness, but go and support a country that thinks women should hide themselves. A couple of secrets before we disappear down this hole. I hate being photographed. I hate talking about myself, and I'm actually quite shy. Yeah, I thought you'd like. In fact, that qualifies me very much not to run a radio program. My parents thought I shouldn't. My mother died in her mid-90s, and to her dying day she kept asking me whether I'd please get a real job one day. And my father made the assessment, he died when I was only 20, but he made the assessment pretty early that I wasn't too bright and I was basically lazy. He's probably right. At that age, who isn't? But he said, advised me to become a postman. He'd lived through the Great Depression, and he said, if you're a postman, there will always be work. He didn't see email coming. And I think he underestimated postmen. I was lucky. I grew up in this area, only a few blocks away. I went to Caulfield High School. That and starting work at the Age, which in those days had this culture of decency and integrity, that and growing up in this area were two of the luckiest things that happened to me in my life. A couple of secrets about journalists. Experts in nothing, but they profess expertise in everything. You live in a culture of all care and no responsibility. which can be a bit dangerous if you ignore the fact there is actually a degree of responsibility there. Most journalists run with a pack. They're frightened or incapable of independent thought. It becomes a blood sport. Too many are self-absorbed, promoting themselves rather than looking after their audience. Clickbait has become, well, it's overtaken news as a driving force. Free-to-air television, well, I think it's finished. Politicians and journalists don't live in the real world. They live in this little echo chamber where they tell each other what really matters. An example of this, a couple of years ago, I saw a report on this on Channel 9 News last night. A couple of years ago I started picking up on the fact that potholes were destroying cars and lives around Victoria. Personally, I've blown 4 tyres and 2 rims in a period of 18 months. Admittedly, that's on the Mornington Peninsula. So I campaigned about this and I was mocked by the other media. Isn't something more important to talk about than potholes? Well, now it's a big issue, and it's a big issue because it touches people's lives. It matters to you. If you bang your wheel and cost you a couple of grand to fix it and you can't get any compensation. Another example is crime. How long did it take the politicians and some in the media to realise that aggravated burglary, juvenile crime was an issue? And it mattered to people. Yeah, sure, they can say statistically you're unlikely to be a victim. Heard Brad Batten say that the other day. But that doesn't help when your neighbour gets knocked off. Of course it goes to the very heart of your feeling of security. Cost of living. It took them months to get onto the fact that cost of living was hurting out in the real world. Another secret, Anthony Albanese and Peter Dutton actually like each other. They get on very well, they like each other. So why the hell can't they work together, put aside all this nonsense we're going through at the moment, and say, look, the fabric of our society is under something of a threat here. The world's a very edgy place at the moment. Heaven knows where the world economy is going. Heaven knows where world peace is going. I'm told Bosnia is a new flashpoint, which hasn't actually emerged in the media yet. But why can't they get together and, I don't know, sit down and actually govern the country for the country? Bipartisanship is dead. I think leadership is dying. I think vision is what you have checked at the optometrist rather than something that you have for the future of the country. Another secret, I guess this isn't so secret, Jacinta Allen is toast. She won't lead into the next election. Ben Carroll will take over. I don't know that he'll make a huge difference. I think if the polls are right, and I sense they probably are, and the Liberals lose on Saturday, they're in real trouble. They've got to reinvent that party. They've maybe even rename it. And they've got to look for a new, younger style of leadership. We've had it. The people, I assume we're mostly boomers in this room. I can't see anybody too close to the age of 30. We've had it. Our time as political power is gone. The majority of voters are now millennials, Gen Z. And they live on Twitter, they live on political slogans, they live on simplicity. I can't blame them for that, they've got lives to live. But they look at the Liberal Party and they see a bunch of blokes, and mostly blokes, in suits talking about something that doesn't really make sense to them or interest them. So they've got to reinvent themselves. And Dan Andrews, are frightened the living daylights out of me, putting Dan Andrews up there. I do know that one of the few decent things he has done is be strong in his support for the Jewish community. I understand that. I'm afraid I'm so cynical about Dan that I'll say what's in it for him. But in fairness, he has done the right thing. But you haven't heard the end of him yet. He'll be back. Isn't that lovely getting banned from all the golf clubs down on the peninsula though? I've never seen anything like that before. I thought, well, he wouldn't turn up to me for 6 years. He got his whole cabinet to ban me. Maybe if I'd run a golf club, he would have wanted to come and talk to me. Okay, tearing ourselves apart. Open to ideas. Hope we've got time. Well, we will have time for some thought because you're very engaged. Why are we tearing ourselves apart? What is it? What's happened that this respect is dying and the hate is building? It's impossible to hold. I can see at several levels why it's happening. I'm interested in your thoughts on what we do. I think it's the leadership politically. I think it's leadership in the media. I think the institutions we used to trust are no longer trusted. Some of them, the church, the Christian church in particular, has done itself massive damage through the atrocities in the Catholic Church. And much of the rest of the Christian church, in my view, is it's abandoned, with some exceptions. There's some great priests and ministers out there, I know a few of them, but I think it's abandoned any hope of much connection with modern society, which is a pity. But once again, it's undermining trust. It's impossible to hold a different point of view without being vilified. You've got these debates that are dominated by abuse and threats. You can't have a debate without, it seems, the other side calling you a crook or a liar. When I was a young journalist, the word liar was defamatory. If you called somebody a liar, you bloody well better prove it or you'd be in court paying money. That was a real insult. And I'm afraid people want to wind me up at times on Twitter, and they did on air when I was taking calls, and if they called me a liar, I'd be off, because about the only thing I've got is my reputation, and I don't lie. I won't lie. You don't agree with what I say, but I'm not going to lie. And to call somebody a liar, I think, is a massive insult. Now, you're living this. Anti-Semitism, it's often been said, is the canary in the coal mine. I was reading a report from the European Union the other day. 10 years ago, they did a survey showing that 90% of the Jews in Europe felt anti-Semitism had got worse, and it was the canary in the coal mine. That's 10 years ago. Well, where has it gone since? And you know that better than me, and I saw enough of it on my radio program. I still get enough of it in my email and some of the responses, I remember after the October 7 attacks, expressing horror, outrage, all what you would expect to be the normal, this is within 24 hours, the normal reaction. This is even before there's any response by Israel. And I remember some guy calling me on air and calling me a Jew lover. Look at what you're just a bloody Jew lover. And I thought, well, maybe I am. I do. I've had a lot of Jewish friends. I enjoy a lot of the Jewish tradition and culture. But I thought, what do you want about, mate? I mean, we've got this atrocity on the other side of the world, and you're worried about whether I'm supporting. You know it's grown. As I say, I think left and right extremism is behind it. I think it's a threat to Australia. I don't think it's unique to Australia. I think the world is developing this ugly mood. I think the verbal brutality of Donald Trump doesn't help, quite seriously. I mean, if you disagree with him, you're a moron or you're a crook. But look what he did to Zelensky in the Oval Office. Now that was, admittedly, Zelensky stood up for himself, fair enough. But what he did there was just, it's difficult to describe, but I think it sets a level. Oh, the President of the United States can do that. Next time I sit down to have a debate with X, Y or Z, I can just abuse it. Twitter, well, now X, it's built a generation that's sort of, through their anonymity in particular, they just build their arguments around hate, bitterness. I've got some optimism because I think the majority of Australians are very decent people. I think, yes, they're laid-back people, perhaps a bit too laid back at the moment, don't understand what's going on around them, but I think and hope they'll start to see the evil that's developing. There's something the academics call XRW, and this gets to the problem of extremism left and right. That's the extreme right wing. It's only part of the problem, but significant. It's already an issue in this country, and ASIO in fact says the extreme right wing is more of a problem than Muslim terrorists, Muslim-based terrorists. XRW covers everything: white supremacy, racism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, a lot of neo-Nazis. Okay, my temptation has been to say they're attention-seeking idiots, ignore them, don't ban them. That could give them strength, but I think we're getting to the stage we're going to have to do something. Whether it's, and we are, I mean, we've banned certain parts of their ideology and their trappings. A couple of days ago, and I think this is an example that really worries me, that booing at the shrine, at the dawn service on Anzac Day. It's difficult to imagine anything more disrespectful. I was saying to one of the people at work yesterday who was talking about the rights and wrongs, I said, you do understand that these are Nazis at a war memorial, honouring people who died, fighting them, and they're booing. And But they're clever. The right wing, probably smarter than the left wing extremists, but they know the buttons to push. And they know, and they're right, that there is growing disquiet around the extent of welcome to country. Not the principle behind it, but you land on the aircraft or you go, everywhere it's welcome to country or acknowledgement of country. That in itself isn't a bad thing, but the extreme right wing have picked up on the fact that so many people in the community are feeling, we're not sure this is right, being welcome to our country. I also thought, that was my feeling, I thought the speech from the Indigenous leader at the dawn service was wrong in several ways. I mean, he didn't even acknowledge the event, the fact of why he was there, what it was about. But that doesn't justify the booing. Anyway, I made this point, lamented the booing on Twitter and said, look, there's lots of discuss about welcome to country, but don't go bloody booing at the shrine. Normally I get 30 to 50,000 views when I say something on Twitter, which isn't a lot. I got 10 times that. I got 300,000 reactions, most of which hated me, most of which disagreed with me, and most of which entirely missed the point that this was a group of Nazis stirring something up at the War Memorial. What they thought it was all about was welcome to country. That was clever manipulation. It was very clever manipulation. A couple of examples, and I won't dwell on it, but the hate-driven society and the protests, the extreme left and the extreme right. The war in Gaza has given protest impetus, no question. New reasons to hate from the extreme left, the pro-Palestinian protesters. Now, they're entitled to protest. I'm sure some in the Jewish community don't support the way the war has been managed. But the hate in these protests, the support, terrorists, the threats, the refusal to admit that October 7 was anything other than atrocity against mankind. Why would the same people probably lament the September 11 attacks? Well, all right, thousands killed there, but equally, people going about their lives, not doing the same people. What is that music? Oh, the same people who would ignore the atrocities of October 7 may well be lamenting what happened on September 11. I've covered some angry demonstrations in my time. I go back to protests against John Kerr when he sacked Whitlam. Nasty, violent, bitter Vietnam demonstrations. Not so bitter, but pretty nasty at times. The Springboks. Don't worry, I thought it was mine. The Vietnam demonstrations were bad enough. The Springboks were awful, but I've never seen anything like these demonstrations. And what do our leaders do about it? Well, it started, as we all know, as you know better than me, started with those events at the Opera House in Sydney. Disgraceful scenes, barely criticised by our leadership. And you know why. There are 1 million people in this country in the last census identifying as Muslim. There are 120,000 identifying as Jewish. Now, we also know that those 120,000 punch above their weight in all sorts of areas like law and medicine and arts and business. It's one man, one vote, and that $1 million people outweighs the 120,000. You know, I had a Greens MP on the program not long after the October 7 atrocity. She was a Victorian MP. And 12 times in one interview I asked her whether at least she accepted Israel had a right to exist. Wouldn't answer it. Just avoided it, and that's not the issue, that's not the question. What hope you got when you've got that sort of attitude? I think the Greens are not just an economic disaster waiting to happen, I think they're a moral disaster unfolding. And again, how's the Prime Minister handle it? This is where I talk about leadership and decency. Every member, bar one, of the Federal Labor Party, Member of Parliament, has preferenced the Greens second. The one that didn't was Josh Burns. Okay, I think Josh is a good man actually. He's a good member and he's a Jewish man, as you well know. But even he didn't put him second for that reason. It was party political reasons. It was to do with political reasons within his seat. But what does Elbow do? Well, the Green candidate, his preference is a woman called Hannah Thomas. She says Israel is guilty of genocide. She wants Australia to blacklist Israel. She wants the Israeli ambassador expelled. At one stage, she was part of a blockade in protest at Elbo's office. So the Prime Minister, who should lead decency, for the sake of political benefit, puts the Greens second and doesn't say in his ballot paper which party they're from. That just astounds me that he could even do that. The Attorney General, Mark Dreyfus, as you well know, son of a Holocaust survivor, puts the Greens second. Says it's a member for the party. So much for political conscience, he can't genuinely be comfortable with that. And the media seems not to care too much. Oh, there's a brief interest and they move on. Okay, it's not about the Greens, it's not about Labor, it's about political hypocrisy and leadership. And leadership to me says, look, I should put the Greens second, it's better for me politically, but I cannot tolerate somebody who does bump, bump, bump. Somebody who talks about genocide and breaking relations with one of our strongest allies. Elbo also says he won't do a deal with them to hold minority government. If you believe that, then the scammers are coming for you. Can you imagine any political leaders saying they would preference second a political party that wanted to ban Muslim migration or ban the burqa? Why not? I mean, they would struggle with it. Again, these are the unanswerables. It is okay, they say, to criticise the extreme right because everybody knows Nazis are bad. But it's not okay to criticise the extreme left when they're doing some atrocious things. And not just around the Middle East, they're doing around many things. Another example, Ali France, the Labor candidate standing against Peter Dutton up in Queensland. Tweets have surfaced from her posting a doctored photograph of Peter Dutton in an SS uniform. And there's some other offensive stuff. The Prime Minister, when asked, I stand by her. He says it was 10 years ago. People learn and move on. Well, that's true, but do you really think he would have taken that view if a Liberal candidate had posted a doctored photograph of him as a mass murderer, even if it was 10 years ago? There's no consistency. There's lots of hypocrisy, not enough leadership. Of course, Peter Dutton, I mean, it's easier for him because he's not the incumbent and he's had a dreadful campaign. It really has been, what would I say, incompetence. I touched on this earlier, but who else do you trust? My dad was a country headmaster, pillar of the community. Teachers were trusted in those days. The latest action in schools by a pro-Palestinian group this week, they're circulating a teaching resource urging teachers to challenge the myth of Anzac Day, to stand the kids up and challenge the myth of Anzac Day, that the Australian diggers were actually mass murderers. Of course there's myth around Anzac Day, but there's a great deal of truth and inspiration, and we're trying to build a culture here. A culture of decency and respect and mateship and everything else. And yes, there's some myth around that. Look, I've been to Gallipoli. I stood on the shallows at dawn. It's a very special place. You can understand how the Australian culture started to develop there. Now this is relevant. Just quickly, you're probably aware I'm not Jewish. My friends who are Jewish tell me I can never carry the inherent pessimism of Judaism. But I get close because I was brought up a Methodist. Oh, geez, talk about hair shirts, the Methodists. Just a quick example too of how very early in life I started to see some of this hypocrisy. My parents wanted me to be a member of the Methodist Church, and that required taking a form of communion. I was about 13, I suppose. And I had to go to all these classes where I'd be taught what it meant, and that was all fine. I didn't have any great problem with the philosophy as it was taught, nor should I at 13, I suppose. And then they said, all right, you're going to go and have the communion next week, and you've got to promise X, Y, and Z. And I looked at the list, and that was until I had to promise to go to church every Sunday. Ooh, that's a worry. What if Melbourne's playing, you know? And I took the advising minister aside for a moment. I said, look, I'm happy with all this, and I know you're doing the right thing, but I can't stand in front of your God, my God at that time. I can't stand there and promise to go to church when I won't want. I won't. And he said, why not? And I said, well, there's the footy. But more than that, I don't mean to be hurtful. I never say I don't mean to be hurtful, but you're boring. You don't actually relate to me, and I can't really, as a 13-year-old boy, I can't really understand what's going on. And he said, don't worry, son, that's all right. Just get up there and promise and then don't come. I walked out and I've never been back. I said, hang on. If that's the sort of hypocrisy, you're asking me to stand in front of your God, promise to come to church and fingers crossed. No. A few things about my background, which are relevant, I think. I grew up in this area. I was very lucky to grow up in this area because I grew up not understanding or even seeing or hearing about things like anti-Semitism or racism or racial prejudice. My best friend at school, probably still my best friend in life, is a Jewish man. He's lived in the States for 40 years. We catch up and it's an immediate connection, old mates. Don't worry, his sister Leslie's here today. I'm not going to tell any stories about the parties we used to hold at your house when your parents were away. But Leslie's family embraced me immediately and without question as a friend of their son, some of the most caring, generous people I've ever met. At no stage did I stop to think my best friend was Jewish. Thought nothing of it then, I think nothing of it now. Also in our friendship group there was a ratbag American Catholic, a Greek son of migrants who were building the classic fish and chip shop empire. Still see him too. A young man from a working class family who'd never been to church in his life. He'd be called a bogan today. And then of course Caulfield High School, there was a mix of Italian, Asian, mid-European. It was multicultural before multiculturalism exists. None of us thought anything about it because we were kids growing up with mates who were friends because we got on well together. We didn't know where we came from. We shared a sense of humour and perhaps a liking for underage drinking a little bit and a bit of a rebellious attitude to authority. I remember one of my schoolmates, and I won't use his name, I don't want to embarrass him. He was far too intelligent to be close in our friendship group. He was a nerd, very intelligent young nerd, and last I knew a well-regarded academic. I was in awe of his intellect even then, but one of the things that stuck in my mind in those days, his father was a barber in the area. My dad was a school teacher and believed that short back and sides was the only way to go. Thank you, Peter. So he gave me strict instructions. So I went to see the barber. I had to say short back and sides, and that meant shaved up to here. It's now fashionable again. But those days it wasn't. It was the early days of the Beatles, and I'd come out looking like a half-shaved egg. And the mates had all mocked me. But the point is, one warm day he's cutting my hair with his sleeves rolled up, and I noticed a tattoo on his forearm. Guess I was about 12 or 13 years old. I had no idea what it meant. Asked my parents. They're good people, good caring people. They'd lived through a lot. They didn't want to tell me. They just said it was something to do with the war. I can't remember exactly how I found out what that number was. Maybe I did something very unfashionable these days. I went to a library. But I learned a little about what it was, about the Holocaust, about the camps. I remember trying to digest it. And I won't say I was horrified. I was baffled. I didn't understand enough. It gradually seeped through and I became horrified, but I couldn't understand initially why it had happened, how it had happened, and after having been through much, how this man could get on with his life. He never spoke much. Now that might have been lack of English, I don't know, but he had a powerful impact on me, as powerful as if he'd spoken for hours. Why we were not taught these lessons at Caulfield High School in the mid-60s is beyond me. We learned about wars in China and Japan and all these. I remember nothing in my education about that part of the Second World War. In fact, I remember very little about the Second World War. Maybe they thought it was too early. That's why I was lucky. I grew up in this area with friends from parts of the world I'd never heard of. Managed to grow up with perhaps less of the, I hope, inbuilt white Anglo-Saxon arrogance that you can get. I made friends for life. Multiculturalism has problems. At times we lose sight of that. And some groups in this country initially seem not to get what a privilege it is to be here. I don't blame hate on multiculturalism. I blame the people indulging that hate. How they got into this country, I don't know. But you know far more about that than I do, because even though I grew up in this area, I was on the edge of it. And we didn't see a lot of it because we were all too busy being mates. What's happened to that? Does that still happen? I don't know. Is there a school like that somewhere? I mean, it wasn't the best school. It was a pretty grubby old school. We went there. I mean, I was in the top 8, which shows how bad it was. The jockeys had just moved out. The jockeys all went there, and then till they got to 14, they went off and pulled up horses and do whatever jockeys do. But dear me, my smartwatch says it's time to finish. Don't you get sick of these things shouting at you? It's like a car I was driving the other day. Oh, don't go too fast. I think there are things the media can do. I think media is culpable in this. They can represent people. They can lift people up. A couple of examples. And this isn't, I hope, to pump up my own tyres. I want to display a philosophy which I think is endangered, if not extinct. During the COVID crisis, which produced Colonel Sanders, I was on air with my 8:30 program. I was out of town. I'd set up a little studio. And I was on air. Look, it was one of the most difficult but most rewarding times of my career. We deliberately approached the program in this way. There are awful things happening. And in those early days, I mean, the uncertainty about it was just terrifying. I remember talking to privately one of the emergency authorities, and he's saying, mate, we've got to have people dead in the streets. Thank God it didn't happen. And I think Daniel Andrews in the early days did the right thing. But we approached it this way. There are awful things happening. You need to know about them around the world and here. And you need to know about the deaths and the vaccines and the lockdowns. You need to know all this stuff. We'll do it without embellishment, without spin, without fake drama, because you didn't need fake drama. You had enough real stuff. But we'll weave into it positivity. Some of the good things happening in the community. I saw some magnificent things through that time. Remember people painting rocks? Let's go to the park and paint rocks to cheer people up. I was in a little town down on the coast, and I remember going into a rare shop to the supermarket, and all the benches that people sat on had flowers put on them. And I asked one of the shopkeepers, oh yeah, somebody comes and does that in the middle of the night. They've been doing it for months, just to brighten people. One of the most and we'd highlight that. I mean, paying forward coffee. Some guy rang and said, I'm just in this coffee shop, drive in, and somebody paid for my coffee, so I paid for the next block. No, it's not me. Sounds like mine. Paying forward the coffee. I remember one of the most powerful things we did, we called it Phone a Friend. We would get the audience to write in and nominate people who needed a bit of a boost, so we'd ring them unannounced, get them on air and have a chat about it, and send a big hamper of chocolates, which probably wasn't what they needed in the middle of COVID. The idea was to give them a lift and to give everybody else who was listening a lift. I remember an 85-year-old lady, I think one of her children asked us to call her. She said she's struggling a bit. She was living alone in a 5-bedroom house. Out in this area somewhere, a big old 5-bedroom house. I said, you're doing okay, it must be tough, you can't see anybody. She said, well, no, I've got my knitting, I've got the cooking, I can FaceTime the grandkids on the iPad. She was coping. She'd seen war, she'd seen worse. She said, we'll get through this. Guy I rang on the peninsula, his wife was a paramedic, and we're just having a normal chat, and he suddenly started crying. The emotions were this raw during this period. And he was feeling guilty. He said, look, I'm at home safe, looking after the kids. My wife's out there, paramedic, transporting COVID patients around. I feel so guilty. Crying. You could hear the pain. And I think I'm sure the audience could feel the pain. Everybody Then his wife rang him and said, hang on. I couldn't be out there doing it unless you were doing this. And they connected on air. It was magnificent. I'm sure anybody listening to that would have been lifted, and that's what we were trying to do. Look, I've been involved in a few deliberately uplifting campaigns. I used to say to my audience, come on, we've got to fix something. We've got to fix something. Let's find something to fix. Remember little Tyler Fishlock? He, 3 or 4, about to lose his second eye to cancer. Family wrote to all the FM stations. This is interesting, the FM stations ignored them. Wrote to us and said we'd like him to meet some of his Richmond players because he supported Richmond before he goes blind. Richmond, footy clubs are notorious for not doing anything. They're very slow to act. The Richmond players were out and had kick to kick with him in his backyard the next day. Then he went to hospital and lost his eye, second eye. He's had a few cancer bouts since. But anyway, he came in to see me a few weeks later. I'm quite friendly with the family now. And as a 3 or 4-year-old dog, he's running around flat out in the studio. Round in circles, flat out. And he goes bang into a solid glass wall. I thought, oh no, he's broken something or he's howling. Poor little kid. And I'm sort of going over to him. His mum goes, no. And he gets up and he goes, oops! And off he went. That little kid's made me I haven't collected it yet, but he's made me a Japanese stool at his woodworking group. I don't know how he does it, but it's magnificent, magnificent work. The Alana and Madeline Foundation, born out of horror, started in my office. And once again, I mean, Walter Mickak's a mate. He lost his wife and 2 daughters there. He's got on with his life. Gay Fiddler, she was involved in it as well. She lay on the floor in the Broad Arrow Cafe with her friends had been killed. She had their body matter all over her. She lay there pretending to be dead while the bloke stood over with a gun. And she and Walter said, okay, let's turn this into something positive. The Alana and Madeline Foundation. I remember standing in the room, the first fundraising ball we had 100,000 people. We raised 600 grand or something like that. It was just decency, The flowers on the steps of Parliament. I was going to talk more about, actually I'm going to talk more about a lot of things, but I won't, about this sort of extremism and hate. I think we've had enough of that. Let me tell you about some of the people I've dealt with. And I'll avoid the use of the perpendicular pronoun, as Les Carline used to call it, because there's too much of that in journalism. There's nothing special about me. It's the microphone. This is what's got the power. And I've discovered that pretty much since I stepped away from the microphone. Most people I used to deal with are still pretty friendly. And I put Albanese and Dutton in that class, but there's a few I just don't hear from anymore. That's fair enough. This is a classic journalistic dilemma. I have told this story before. I hope it's not boring, but it's old news. It's not fake news. The year was 2021, October 2021, towards the end of the bad days of the pandemic. I got a call from a source I knew in Canberra, and he said, "We've got troubles." You're not a politician, not a politician. And I said, "Why? What's the problem?" He said, "The Prime Minister is in a very, very bad place. Scott Morrison is very mentally unwell." I thought, oh God, Prime Minister. Okay, he went through the detail. No political gain. He said, I said, "Do you want me to broadcast this?" And he said, "Yes, I think the country needs to know. He is very unwell." He kept using this term, he's a very, very bad place. I didn't know what to do. I mean, what do you do? Mental health's a personal thing, very private thing. There was no sign that he was not handling the job adequately. And I rang him on his private mobile. And I put it to him, and he denied it, but not very convincingly. And he was in a hell of a hurry to get off the phone. And I thought, no, nothing at the time. And I took full notes of the conversation because I thought, I believe it. I think it's true. What do you do? Now, in journalism, I think it's a bad thing to be overconscious of the power you wield. You wield responsibility, not power. I didn't for a moment think about the historical implications of this. I thought about whether it was the right thing to do. If I had gone public, I mean, these are the days Josh Frydenberg was living at the lodge with him, and we later found out, which probably supported this doubt, that he'd been signing himself into all sorts of ministries without telling anybody. That wasn't logical behaviour. Anyway, I've been told He's very seriously mentally unwell. He's denied it. I believe it. What do? If I'd gone public, he probably, well, I don't know. He would have had to stand down while he had treatment. Maybe he wouldn't have led into the next election. Josh Frydenberg may have led into the next election. Albanese won by this March. Josh, I think, is a very good performer, a very good politician. He may well have won that election. Now, I didn't think about that because I thought that I had to simplify it more than that. And it was all true, of course. When he stepped down, the Prime Minister wrote a book saying, well, what he said it was, the way he described, agonising and debilitating. He had had mental illness, bordering on depression. He hated getting out of bed in the morning. He was medicated. If he hadn't have been medicated, he said he would have slipped into a serious depression. It was agonising and debilitating. And he was trying to run the country at a time of COVID and heaven knows what other things developing. Should he have told us? Should he have stepped down? Should he have been honest with me? Should I have broadcast? I don't know. I don't regret not broadcasting because it is personal, because there was no evidence he was failing. And the other thing is if I'd broadcast and said, oh, guess what, the Prime Minister's mentally ill and should step down, I'll go wait for treatment, but he denies it. Who's going to believe me? They're going to believe me or the Prime Minister. And the Prime Minister's quite able to go out and continue to deny it. I'll wind up quickly. Darren Institute's had this lovely saying, I think I'll write a book one day about people who have met me. Thank you, Darren. Some of the people I've met, I've dealt with every Prime Minister since Billy McMahon. I knew Bob Hawke well. I was there the night he promised to give up drinking if he became Prime Minister, and which he did, of course. And the minute he stepped down, he's back to the booze. But what people don't know is the night he promised to give up the booze, he was actually drunk. Lee was drunk. Paul Keating, consummate political bully. He sold the Herald Weekly Times. He went into cabinet with copies of editorials I'd written as editor of the Herald. So these, well, I won't use his language. These people are not our friends. We should get rid of them. We'll sell to Rupert. He didn't. Rupert's a businessman. Rupert's nobody's mate. Keating didn't see that. He came in early for a radio interview soon after I'd started. And just before we go into air, he's in the studio chatting. He's now, you C word. He's got the most foul mouth I've ever come across, Paul Keating, or he did have then, and a handshake like a limp lettuce. It's extraordinary. It's the worst handshake I've ever... Anyway, UUC, he said, I fixed you effing up at the Herald. You give me any trouble here, I'll do exactly the same here. Bang, we're on air. Oh dear, I regret not doing it. I was so new to the job, I just sort of got on with the interview. A few years later, I would have said, righto, mate, you just threatened me, repeat it. Microphone's on, repeat it. What does he do? He either tries to get out of it or he wouldn't have repeated it. I've been banned by him, banned by Andrews, of course, Bob Hawke for a few years, Julie Bishop, Scott Morrison, Julia Gillard. I got an email from her yesterday asking for money to help Elbow. Hasn't talked to me for 10 years and suddenly, oh, please give Elbow $50. I'll go jump. I fought with chief commissioners, but I got on with most of them fairly well. Jeff Kennett, always enjoyed fighting with Jeff. Steve Bracks, enormous respect for Steve Bracks. He hated lying. He'd sit there in the studio and if he started to try and con you or lie or trick his way around something, he'd start to sweat. And you always knew you'd had a good interview if he walked out and there's a pool of water on the table. John Cain, enormous respect for John Cain. He didn't have much respect for any of them when he finished. Mark Donaldson, VC, an extraordinary young man. If you haven't read his book, I recommend it. He's a hero for what he did in Afghanistan, but he's a hero for the way he dragged himself literally out of the gutter. Two, I have to mention, Nelson Mandela and Dame Elizabeth Murdoch. I interviewed Mandela on stage. I was edgy. It had to be interesting. He had bad hearing. He had trouble with the Australian accent, and I had a pile of questions he didn't want to answer. I thought it was going to be terrific. You know, it was live TV and there's people down the exhibition building, people everywhere. He won't understand me, he won't hear me, and he won't answer me. This will be good. Anyway, he walks out, shakes hand, leans forward and says, you be gentle with me, won't you? And he was a superb interviewer. He was, if he started to go on a bit, I'd move him a chair, he'd pick up on the body language. He had charisma, not because of what had gone before, that was part of it, but just the man himself. I remember there was another speaker going on soon after him, and he was on the official table, everybody's sitting looking formal and pompous. He had a child on his knee, and he was talking to that child. He wasn't paying any attention to all these tossers who were doing their special speeches. Dame Elizabeth Murdoch, now this is another challenge. She was well into her 90s, again on stage, live, wasn't being televised. And Dame Elizabeth turned up. She was wheeled in a wheelchair, didn't need it, got out of the wheelchair, sat at the table. Wine, yes, certainly, she said, give him a glass of wine. Oh, thank you, and I thought that. She's had about 3 or 4 glasses in no time. And, well, she was in her mid-90s. I thought, this is going to be interesting, what's going to happen here? So anyway, we get across and I formally shake hands and she leans forward and says, you be gentle with me, won't you? It was a superb speech. She did a brilliant job. She was telling stories about smacking Rupert with a slipper, and she sat down in the chair, kicked off her shoes. Righto. She was down to earth. She was a very privileged existence, Dame Elizabeth, but she was a very down to earth person. Yeah, righto. I really want to get your views and ideas. So we'll do that now. But a couple of very quick points. I'm worried about the future of Victoria and politics in generally because Dan Andrews has been so successful. And he has been the most successful Premier of Victoria in history, 3 elections. He has set a template which I think is anti-democratic. You punish enemies, you look after friends, you campaign through social media, which isn't detail, it's a slogan, not a policy. He's been a political bully, he's been politically dishonest. The Commonwealth Games was a con from day one, cost us $500 million. He swore, well he didn't swear, he dodged around the fact that the East-West link would cost us $1.1 billion. The suburban rail link is just a nonsense and that's going to cost us a lot of money. During the pandemic, I remember there's this information coming out now that Andrews was saying, oh, we're acting on police requests and advice from the Chief Health Officer to have the curfew. You've all got to stay home, don't go out the... God, I was allowed to go out because I was an essential service, for heaven's sake. I can't believe that. But I had to take a pile of papers like this. Towards the end of 2020, Shane Patton, who was then the new Chief Commissioner, told me on air that he hadn't requested the curfew. The first he knew about it was when it was announced. Brett Sutton, the Chief Health Officer, told me he hadn't requested the curfew. They told him they wanted it, so he signed off. So somewhere, Daniel Andrews, why don't we have a curfew? That's okay, he's entitled to make those decisions, but he said he did it because the police wanted it. He said he did it because Brett Sutton, the Chief Health Officer, wanted it. Nonsense. So what happened after that? Brett Sutton was not allowed to talk to me for the remainder of the pandemic. Chief Health Officer in the middle of a pandemic should be getting information out, wasn't allowed to talk to me. Shane Patton was carpeted. And it's probably got something to do with the reasons he's no longer there. Very good Chief Commissioner in my view. Final point, what do we do to stop the country tearing itself apart? We've got to rebuild media. We've got to rebuild attitudes in the way I talked about within media to actually go out. Not just report good news, that's artificial. Most of the news isn't good. You report the news, but you go out and you look to empower people, to help people, to empower people to say, yeah, we're with you, let's do it. On little campaigns and things that I was talking about. I think we've got to return to decency. As I say, Albo and Dutton are both decent people, but they're overwhelmed by this political imperative. This campaign's one of the most dishonest I've seen. And one of the most shallow. We're heading into these dreadful times, very difficult times. Nobody's willing to address it. They've got to stop dodging, spinning, blaming everybody else. Final example, I was on the panel back in 2004, Latham and Howard debating. I was on TV, I was on the panel with Michelle Grant and Laurie Oak while I was doing that. But anyway, I was there. I went back to have a look at it the other day just to compare it to what was going on. It was respectful. Mark Latham, for heaven's sake, who hasn't said much sensible things, but it was respectful. There was some information in there. And it wasn't us on the panel, it was the way the politicians operated. But I had a beam of bond about health. I've had it for years. I think the health system is a mess and nobody's willing to take it on. Kevin Rudd tried briefly and gave up. But, so I'm asking questions about health and how it's going on. You know, they were even fighting about who had the best bulk billing figures in Medicare, which is exactly what they're doing today. And Latham outlined what he saw as the main problems in health. He didn't actually say what he's going to do about it. The problems were overcrowded emergency departments, waiting times for surgery, some types of elective surgery, shortage of GPs, bed block. Elderly people are stuck in the hospital and there's nowhere for them to go, so there's nowhere for the acute patients to come in. And I replayed it several times and I thought, those are exactly the problems we're facing today. This is 21 years ago. They're exactly the problem. Nobody has done anything. Still nobody will do anything. And this election campaign's got no closer to giving us any answers. And that to me is failing the people. As I said, none of us are much over 30 in this room anymore, but we know the health system more intimately probably than most of us wanted. I know I've sent a few doctors on holidays to the States. But we know the system and we know how it fails. If we've got private health insurance, we're very lucky and we can do better. I've got a couple of mates who work in emergency at the Alfred. The stories they tell me is horrendous. And if the leaders in 2004, right through until now, can't get together and say, for the sake of the people, we've got to fix this. We've got to, again, sit in a room together, sort it out, get the experts in. They won't even talk to the people who know, the people on the wards, the people in the emergency department, the people in the theatres. It's just, it really is disappointing. So perhaps when I say they should be looking at this undercurrent of bitterness, of aggression, of unpleasantness in our society, we've got no hope, because that's even harder than the health system. And they've done nothing significant with the health system. But you've got the answers. As I said, the most informed people in the world. That's I don't know if I've got an answer. I've got some ideas, and I'd welcome anything from you. Give me a call, 133 693. I missed that. Oh, thanks.